Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Shaw Auditorium for the Open Council meeting of Monday, June 27, 2011. And we'll start off by calling the meeting to order and ask Ms. Harrison if you could walk us through the introduction of late items, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Add item 6C, delegations pertaining to agenda items. Mr. Fred Taylor regarding the reconsideration of water treatment plant funding. Delete item 20A, delegations pertaining to items not on the agenda. Ms. Marianne Erb.
Thank you. And could we ask for an adoption of the agenda as... Did you want to do that? Someone want to...
Move adoption of the agenda as amended.
Second, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And the adoption of the minutes, please.
Move the adoption as circulated.
Second, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We'll move into presentations, and I would like to acknowledge the Civic Sports Merit Awards, and this is for the 2010 Huntsman Senior World Games that were played in Utah in the ladies over plus division, and so that said, we will call on. We've got here Gloria Young, Donna Eastham, and Karen Peniak, and they can maybe pronounce the term better than I can on that if they wish, only if they wish. So if I could get you to come forward, please. Just 1 second, I want to get my cue card. Yeah, right there's perfect. And can you pass these ones to me there? And I'll who is who? We'll have to get involved.
They're in good shape. Just
turn it off. She should be doing it. Yeah, come here. You should be doing that.
check 1, 2.
Yes, just go and stand up there. Okay, so we can get you to introduce yourselves as I go down the line here.
I'm Donna Eastham.
Okay, now Donna, which group was this again that you were representing? No, sorry, fine, thank you.
Karen Peniak. Gloria Young.
Okay, so we have here a presentation for the plaques to start. Oh, hi, come on forward. That was very kind of you to do that. So the very first one we have, Donna, is this is Mayor and Council. Congratulations, Donna Eastham, in acknowledgement of your recent achievement in winning the 2010 Huntsman World Senior Games slow pitch. Well, that sort of gives it away, doesn't it? Ladies 65 plus division, bringing recognition and honor to our city and district. So we wish you continued success in your field of endeavors. So Donna, present that to you. And we've got a picture here. Do you want me to hold up one side of this thing like we know? Great, okay.
Thank you.
Any words?
Just thank you very much for honoring us. That's nice of you.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So, Karen, we'll get you the next one here, the same condition, and we'll get a picture. Hang on to this side of it. That'll be your side. I'll hold on to this side here. Okay? No words?
Well, thank you very much.
And last but not least, and we also have some other stuff, so don't rush away. And Gloria, this, I'll let you hold that side.
Okay.
Sort of sunny side up, and we'll, whoops. Come on, Ray. I was going to ask how real estate was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Better than his.
Well, you can do another one? Anyway, any words? No? Okay, just before everyone goes, we got some presentations too, and I was going to get Donna. This is for you. There's your little keeper one there.
Thank you very much.
And Karen, yeah, they're in order. Thank you. For you, and for Gloria. For you.
Great. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, ladies. That's great. Appreciate it. Good. Yeah, congratulations. Thank you. Well, I know we've got some very capable sports people on the council here now. We won't go into names, but I'm sure any one of those three ladies could have whipped these guys. So
If you had seen those ladies play when they're a couple of years younger, it would blow your socks off.
Well, I'd say by the size of those awards, they did pretty well today, too, in recent times. So.
They are absolutely extremely competitive, good athletes. They've played for years. They've won a number of championships on different teams, and they just keep rolling along. And I'd put them up against any of us in a good game of fast pitch.
Thank you very much. Okay, delegations pertaining to agenda items. We have up to 10 minutes. And the first one is Mr. Bob Munick, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, on behalf of the trustees of St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church regarding development variance permit DVP 172 for a sign variance at 4235 Departure Bay Road. Welcome, sir. You have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It won't be that long.
Okay.
Councillors. My name is Bob Munick. I live on 3396 College Shore Road here in Nanaimo, and I'm a member and trustee of the St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church located on 4235 Departure Bay Road. I would like to point out the current status on the sign, and you can see it on the left on the projection there. It is well below the standard we feel is appropriate to the image of what our congregation likes to portray. The men's group in our church has been fundraising for the last 5 years to put up a quality sign, which will include an electronic message center. There are a lot of activities taking place at our church that not only benefits our membership, but the neighborhood as well as the community of Nanaimo at large. A manually managed readograph will be less expensive and easier to get approval for from the city of Nanaimo. We will hope to get the message out with the least bit of trouble for the few staff that we employ. We are not in the business with an aggressive approach to marketing, and the electronic message center as proposed on the right-hand side of the slide. It is not a video type monitor, as you can see. We hope that you as the City Council appreciate this and that we're in full cooperation with the Planning Department in regards to any regulations it feels necessary. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, before you go, sir, just 1 minute. We do have some questions for you. The first one is Councillor Sherry.
To you, Mr. Chairman, the position of where the Rideau sign's going to be, is it close to, when I look at the picture here, and is it close to the walk sign, or is it further towards Norwell Drive?
It is closer to Norwell Drive, yes.
Closer to
the new sign would be would be about I would say 5 meters away from it.
Okay, it's just that the concern that I have, the way it is right now, where that flashing sign is.
Yes.
Okay, for the crosswalk.
Yeah, as you can see, the signage for the crosswalk is over the walkway, the sidewalk, and the sign is very much more to the right of it in the property.
Yeah, but it's just a matter of, are they like this or are they like this?
Oh, they're ways apart.
Thank you.
Councillor Patchy.
Thank you, Worship. Evening, Mr. Munick. 2 questions for you. The first one is where you are proposing the sign that is to the east of the controlled pedestrian crossing, or to the west of that?
I think it's further north, if I understand it correctly. No, it would be more to the west.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is because I sometimes have a heck of a time coming down Wassell Way and want to turn left onto Departure Bay Road, where there's the controlled pedestrian sign on top of all the regular traffic. And then we quite often have Wellington School students who cross not necessarily in the crosswalk, that I really wouldn't want to be distracted by a sign that is too close to the corner there. Is there a way to consider that it goes back as far towards Country Club as you possibly could?
We could put it closer to Country Club Mall. That there's quite a stretch there that we could put a sign up. It's sort of in the middle of our property now, or maybe 2/5 in from the corner. There's already a left turn closer to the sign when you go left onto Barons.
Okay. The other question I have is to staff, Your Worship. Since this is zoned institutional, these lights would be turned off between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m.?
Yes, that's correct.
And you're aware of that?
I'm aware of that, yeah, and we have been talking with the planning department about this before.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that was my question too. You've had communication with our staff as well.
Absolutely.
And good. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you, Worship. I see on the sign picture on the left, there's more than one sign on the property. And will this sign replace all signages that I see in the visual?
We hope to put the messages that are on the different signage board on the new proposed signage.
Are you sure you want to get rid of that sandwich board? Are you sure about that?
We think it looks nicer.
Thank you.
Okay, I see no further questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
There's a delegation.
Second? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. The next delegation is Mr. Jim Taylor regarding decision to build a new water treatment plant. Mr. Taylor, you have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you. Council, am I on?
You're on.
Okay.
There's a pause when I have to start the timer. I'm sorry for that. And there's a bit of a pause there.
Thank you for hearing my presentation tonight. My wife would certainly agree with the comment that I'm getting older and grumpier all the time. One of the things I'm becoming less and less tolerant with is this idea of being governed by bureaucrats that I never elected. These demands by VHA's staff that we need to spend $65 million tax dollars to fix what is arguably a non-existent problem is the current case in point. Nanaimo has decades and decades of proven ability to deliver perfectly safe drinking water to the taps of Nanaimo taxpayers. Clearly, the water that Nanaimo is being treated, the water in Nanaimo is being treated and delivered, could be the envy of any other community anywhere. So why is our fact-based historical data not considered to be superior to the opinion of some bureaucrats working at VHA? After a discussion with Mr. Sims at the city today, the only honest conclusion I can draw is that there is a whole lot of arbitrary decisions that are made by VHA when it comes to determining how they interpret the rules and how they're going to be applied. I think that coin tossing has got a lot to do with how they figure out their decisions. For example, VHA insists that we need to have a membrane filter to control turbidity. Yet, in this past year, there was 40 occasions when that turbidity in the Nanaimo water actually exceeded what they call to be safe levels, and yet they chose to do nothing about it. They didn't issue any warnings or any advisories. They just said it was above the level they would say is safe and that we have to filter for, but they chose not to do anything about it. So I tried to follow the logic, but after a while, my head just got too sore and I gave up. I realized that this snowball, that is this $65 million plant, is probably well underway and rolling down the hill, and this council is likely powerless to do much to stop it. However, we challenged it a little bit earlier. We might have been able to push back a little bit more seriously against VHA. History proves that our current system is providing safe drinking water now, yet it would seem that council is going to be powerless when it comes to spending about the last penny we got in the purse and then borrowing another $22 million instead of being able to question what is being dictated by VHA. Was this spending going to stop in the city of Nanaimo before we're finally bankrupt? Between the $75 million conference center, a $16 million new office for staff, and $65 million water treatment plant, those three items in total will, on average, have taken about $5,000 out of every single household in Nanaimo in a very few years. That is in addition to the regular taxes, which includes about $55 million a year that goes to pay the wages at City Hall. All at a time when our water, sewer, and roads are being currently seriously underfunded, according to a report from staff last November. If we continue this way, we're going to have a $65 million plant that is going to supply us with some really, 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 really clean water that's going to be flowing through some piping systems that are not being properly maintained. Does anybody see the irony in that? This council is debating whether or not you want to ask the Nanaimo taxpayers if they want to borrow 22 million tax dollars. I would suggest that the proper question is you should be asking them if they want to spend 65 million tax dollars, or would they like to boil their water a couple of times every 10 years or so. This council needs to engage the public and not just keep bowing down to the whims of some dictators at VHA. It's the 65,000 tax-paying voters in Nanaimo who are being dictated to by these bureaucrats at VHA that we must spend 65 million tax dollars to fix what is arguably a non-existent problem. The taxpayer is the one that should be in agreement. It's not enough that a couple of bureaucrats at City Hall agree with a couple of bureaucrats in VHA. You have to have the agreement of the taxpayers. They're the ones that are paying the bill, and in a functioning democracy, I think that their wishes should be respected. If the taxpayers should say no, we don't mind boiling our water a couple of times in 10 years, then you, as their elected representatives, would have a strong political and moral authority to argue with VHA and provincial ministries that if they're going to insist on adding this additional expense, excuse me, then they need to provide more of the funding, not only for the installation, but for the ongoing increased costs that there's going to be to run this plant. You can bet that the cost of a megaliter of water is going to go up with this new filtration system. In Ucluelet, recently, they installed a $480,000 system which satisfies VHA's standards, and the province picked up 80% of that cost. The province right now is funding 75% of the costs for communities with populations of up to 15,000 people. So why is Nanaimo getting about 12% of our total cost? What's going on? Does anybody know? Senior governments, in some cases, will fund up to 2/3 of the cost of a major project like this. At least that's what they did up in Kamloops, which is how they justify collecting all of the income taxes and the sales taxes and the gas taxes and the tax taxes. However, with us, that's not the case. They're not giving us 2/3 at all, not by a long shot. On the city's website, there is a city water supply strategic plan, and in that plan it says that the Nanaimo raw water quality is generally excellent. It also says that a UV disinfection combined with chlorination is an attractive disinfection approach. They don't mention anything in there about the need for a membrane system at all. Excuse me. I don't know whether there's ever been any comparisons made as to what it would cost to just install a UV and a chlorine system, as opposed to also including this membrane. But in that same engineer's report that's on the city website, referring to membranes, there's also a paragraph that says some technologies that looked very promising 10 years ago proved to be uneconomic or did not live up to their expected performance goals. So what kind of technology is it we're actually buying? Once or twice every decade, if I have to boil my water or spend 65 million tax dollars, does seem like a bit of a no-brainer to me. Excuse me, anyone who does have serious health issues should not be relying on any municipal water treatment system to provide them with 100% safe water anyway. If you've got a health issue, you should be having your own auxiliary filtration on top of that. In a worst-case scenario, if something did happen and we had to boil our water, we have the emergency call alert service in place, which means that residents could be notified almost at light speed by either telephone or email if they did have to boil their water. They no longer have to wait for the newspaper to show up to let them know they've got a problem. This is just an observation on how priorities in Nanaimo as how we're spending our money. The other day at the Finance Policy Committee of the Whole meeting, there was city staff was being asked if the $22 million couldn't be funded from reserves instead of a referendum. The city manager at the time said that the new staff office had used up all of the available reserves. I thought that was an interesting comment. Water treatment, new staff office. You figure it out. One other question I have, and this is about the cost of this actual new plant, is how many tenders did we get deciding that $65 million was the best price? Or did we just accept another expression of interest like the one that we did for the new staff office? Or like this conference center, when we were able to build a $52 million building for only $75 million. Is this new water treatment plant a perfectly good $50 million plant for the low price of only $65 million? Does anybody know? Has there been any comparisons? My confidence in City Hall's ability to get a good bang for the taxpayer buck is only getting so cynical because I've been watching what's been going on. We have to borrow money, and at the same time we've got $122 million on deposit collecting interest. In closing, later on tonight, you're going to be dealing with this referendum. But if this council decides later tonight to reverse the referendum on the issue to borrow $22 million for this plant, you're going to be effectively taking away the voice of the Nanaimo taxpayer. You're not going to allow them to have any kind of an input in this whole process. You're not going to be allowing democracy to do its work. Trying to avoid a no vote, which I am sure both council and staff would fear, as it's much easier to keep borrowing and spending, is why I suspect you're going to try and manipulate the vote by using the alternate approval process instead of going to a referendum. If the taxpayers were to say no, then you'd have a strong card to take to senior levels of government to say, we don't care what your ideals are, you're trying to impose upon us a $65 million expense that we just don't feel we need or can afford. And they should listen to us in a functioning democracy. I would hazard a guess that this council and staff will, once more demonstrate their distrust in this democratic process, and again will adopt the practice of governing by bureaucracy rather than democracy. I hope I'm wrong. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you. I see no questions. Thank you very much.
Move receipt of the delegation.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. The next delegation is Mr. Fred Taylor.
I'm Fred Taylor of 204 Emery Way, Mayor Rattan and council members. I speak in favor and support Councillor Holden's request for reconsideration of the June 13, 2011 direction of the Council to hold a referendum regarding the borrowing of funds for a water treatment plant. I believe there are a few important questions and considerations before we continue. Yes, we must have and maintain an independent authority to govern the quality of water provided to the public by any supplier. I believe the priority of the independent authority is to have the ability or power to place demand on any, in fact all suppliers, to provide a quality of drinking water for the protection of the public. I remain of the opinion any demand by the independent authority to govern any treatment process as an acceptable process places the authority into a questionable position if the acceptable process fails. Without knowledge, I raise question to any demand of an independent authority which may indicate any number of treatment processes required. For instance, Nanaimo and Comox, they require in their permits 2 processes, which may be insufficient to accomplish a good water quality. Compare the demands placed upon Nanaimo Waterworks, which I believe is an old name today, a 100-year-old name. I believe it should be a new name. This is from back in 1900s, I believe. And Comox Valley Regional District Water System, both requiring 2 treatment processes. Keep in mind, Nanaimo's water is from what one may call a protected water source, where Comox from an unprotected source. I understand Comox's main source for water is Comox Lake, where many public activities can continue, not to mention swimming, boating, etc. Comox now about to lower their intake pipe in the lake in order to reduce contamination, the gathering contamination. They're going to lower the intake pipe. Demand has been placed on Nanaimo for a very expensive treatment process. Well, it appears such a treatment process for Comox depends on water source protection, and it's listed in the comparisons here. Remember, Nanaimo is protected and quality of water testing approximately 2 years from now. In Comox, they're waiting to see what ultraviolet ray and chlorination as we do works in, and lowering the pipe works in Comox Valley before they apparently placed a demand for this filtration system. They're waiting a few years to see this. Both systems apparently use the chlorination process, but Comox is adding an ultraviolet light disinfection with the potential to defer filtration treatment. I believe at any time the water system in Nanaimo, or in fact anywhere else, has a potential of contamination by water line breakage, etc., regardless of treatment at the source. Funding for any improvements requires a more careful consideration of the taxpayer's pocketbook. As recently reported, Nanaimo has approximately $88 million in reserve accounts. Before I hear any comments about the status of this $88 million, may I refer you to a report to Council dated April the 11th, 2011, where, in quotes, part of the sewer fund used for the Port of Nanaimo, or Vancouver Island Conference Center, was repaid from the 2010 surplus. This clearly indicates the ability to use reserve funds for other purposes. You can use it for sewer to fund this place. You can use our other sewer or other accounts to fund our water problem if we have one. This clearly indicates the ability to use reserve funds purposes at the desire of staff, the recommendation supported by council when it happens. The April 2011 report also states for the last 5 years there has been a range of $1.2 million to $4.6 million per surplus. I would suggest within 5 years we could have sufficient funds from surplus for whatever water treatment or zero tax increases. All depends on council gaining control. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I see no questions. Thank you.
Move receipt of the delegation.
Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item is the Mayor's report, and the only item is item 8, the proclamation, and that 2011 July 3 to 2011 July 9 is Nanaimo Dragon Boat Festival Week in the city of Nanaimo. We go into item 9, Commission reports. A, Parks, Recreation and Culture Commission, smoke-free parks and beaches and facilities. Commission recommendation that Council direct staff to 1, undertake a public input process to gauge support for a smoking ban at all City of Nanaimo parks, beaches and facilities over the summer of 2011 and identify key exemption areas for inclusion in the bylaw. And 2, report back to Parks, Recreation and Culture Commission in September with a summary of the public input process and a draft amendment to the Parks, Recreation and Culture Regulation Bylaw 2008, number 7073, for consideration of a smoking ban. Would anyone like to? Yes, go
I'd
ahead.
like to move recommendations 1 and 2, please, Your Worship.
Okay, 1 and 2. Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Yes,
go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. Certainly support this recommendation and initiative. And just in reading number 1, to undertake this process and gauge support for the smoking ban over the summer of 2011 and identify key exemption areas. Would it be fair for me then to assume that we will also identify areas that are not exempt, period? Like that there would be key areas that are not in question?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be the opposite. Most areas would be, of course, non-smoking. Some of the areas that we're just concerned of going up for a review is if there's some facilities, particularly I was thinking Frank Crane Arena, if we need to create a smoking zone outside that arena somewhere where people could, between events, go out and still have and still smoke. So it'd be looking at those, getting that kind of input. Say there might be some other ones we've missed that may need to have some areas that still have some exemption, and we just collect that kind of data and present that back to council at that time.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Unger.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can't help but get the feeling, here we go again. The public input process is going to cost us money again, and we just add that to the tax bill. We're at a point where when you start limiting people in what they can do in our community, even on the outside. I don't smoke and I don't like smoking, but I think we get to the point where we just get over-governed. You can't do anything anymore without some bylaw being in place, and we have had a problem with so many bylaws being passed where even staff admit they're not enforceable anyway because we don't have the personnel to do it. So that would just mean hiring more people again to enforce something that out in the wide open spaces. I think we're just going overboard, but I would like to know an estimate on the cost of this public input process.
Our intention is to use existing information process that we have now within our social media network, be it our Facebook, Twitter. We'd use a few other surveys that people could submit. We'd also have some surveys that people could submit directly to our recreation centers or other city centers to provide any kind of input that they have. We don't have a specific budget for it. We'd just be utilizing existing resources so that the public could make some comments regarding the concept of proceeding with this type of bylaw.
Thank you.
Councillor Patchy.
Thank you, Worship. Along the same lines to Mr. Harding, if I may. I remember reading not so long ago that there was a fairly high percentage known already of people who would like to see smoking banned in public places, something like 73%. Where did that come from?
It's actually in the report, and it's a survey that the Cancer Society had done through Ipsos Reid. I believe it's on page, I'm not going to find it quickly here enough for you. If anyone else can find it faster than I can. It's in the report. I think it was 87% off.
Okay, well, that said, why would we have to gauge it again?
You don't have to. It's just a suggestion in the sense of allowing, rather than going straight to a bylaw, that some of those issues that we may not know about before we go to a bylaw, that we may want to have some awareness of impact that we may have on specific users of facilities. So we want to gauge. At
this point, you are just attempting to do this via social networks?
Basically, yeah. Okay. And of course through the media, allowing the public to know about it, and we'll have some surveys that we can collect.
Okay, how long would it take?
Well, we're just proposing to do it this summer and get a report back we hope to council in September, October.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnstone.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I certainly support this endeavour and to promote a healthy environment and wellness and healthy living in our community. And if I could, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Harding, we've already attempted to do some of this type of activity at some of our lakes, at the Westwood Lake. And how can you report on how that's been? If people are reading the signs, we're just encouraging people not to smoke in public areas where little children can pick up cigarette butts and inhale secondhand smoke. Has it been effective?
We have a combination. So there is the Nanaimo Aquatic Center grounds in support of the school district. We made as a bylaw, there's no smoking permitted anywhere on the Nanaimo Aquatic Center grounds. And then we have what we did also with the Cancer Society a few years ago. We had smoke-free zones, which aren't by bylaw. They're more education for all our playgrounds that have definable areas, as well as First Beach at Westwood Lake and Loudon beachfront. And they're more informational, and people have seemed to abide by them. Not completely, of course, but most of it's by others advising others that this isn't encouraged here. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Kipp.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, this is an interesting one for me. It's the filth also, and it's filthy habit. And people don't smoke in my house. I tell them to go outside or go off, go away, right? At that point, I think everybody does that. So this is kind of like our house and that. And I think this is rules versus a law. Right? We're trying to get people to follow a rule, and we don't do it. I find the chemicals in the smokes themselves, too, pretty wild. I mean, if we were getting really wild, we'd be banning cigarettes in the community, right? But I think that's where, I wouldn't want to go there. But I support this. I support it. I know the lifeguards have had trouble a few times on some of the beaches, but most people, they think it's a good idea, too. And I don't think there's that many smokers some of them feel impacted, but they do still have places to go. So I support it. Thank you.
Okay, just before that, I just want to make a quick comment that I also support it as well, and I think that, I do support, though, the opportunity for people who do smoke or those that are in favor of this ban can have an opportunity to comment on it rather than just impose it overnight. But having said that, I hope we're not going to spend a lot of money on that process, because I think it's high time that we moved ahead, and I really was hoping we could get this in place for the summer season, but that may not be possible. But I certainly will be supporting it. Question on the motion, all those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Unger opposed, balance of council in favor. The motion passes. We'll move on to committee reports, staff reports 11 and 11A, DP 704, 1150 Milton Street. Staff recommendation the council issue development permit DP 704 at 1150 Milton Street, which would renew development permit number DP 566, including the following variances: a required front yard variance of 5.1 meters or 16.7 feet, and a required flanking street variance of 3.1 meters or 10.2 feet.
Move the staff recommendation.
You couldn't do that twice again, could you? Did you want to pick one as a mover and one as a seconder on that? And I see Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question to staff that neither of the variances have changed since its original application.
No, Your Worship. These are it's a renewal of the previous.
Okay, thank you. It's moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. DP 725 at 10-5931 Island Highway North. Staff recommendation that council issue development permit DP 725 at 10-5931 Island Highway North with the following variances: a watercourse setback variance of 5 meters or 16.4 feet.
Move the staff recommendation.
Second. I see no questions. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. DVP 167 at 281 McCleary Street. Staff recommendation that council direct staff to proceed, directs staff to proceed with the required statutory notification of development variance permit DVP 167 at 281 McCleary Street.
Move the staff recommendation.
Second. Councillor Kipp, you had a comment?
Yeah, Your Worship, just a point of information, or I guess in order. The previous page 11A and the previous page, 11A and B, both have a description of what the variance is about. The next one, C, D, E, F, and that don't always describe what they are. And is there a reason we don't get a simple description? I'm a simple person, but I would love a simple description on it.
Mr. Tucker?
Yes, Your Worship. The first two were for the issuance of development permits. These next ones are for the statutory step that we have to take, which is to notify the adjoining property owners, and it will be coming back at the next council meeting, and that's where you'll see the variances contained within it. But we can certainly adjust that if council would like to see what the variance is as part of the initial statutory notification.
I love the fact that I have to go search it out, too, to find out what it is, but it's just a point of order.
I guess technically it's a difference between DP and DVP.
Yes, that's right.
Comes in. Okay, Councillor Patchy.
Thank you, Worship. To staff as well. Mr. Tucker, can you put this in perspective for me with the new zoning bylaw 4500 as far as the height of the accessory building might be? That would go to 7.5?
Yes, I believe that's right. I didn't bring my copy of 4500 with me, but I believe that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Johnstone.
Thank you, Your Worship, and again through you to staff. The sight lines in the laneway, then you say they're not going to be impeded?
That's the commentary that we've got back from our referrals internally. One of the variances in this case is to move the rear yard setback to reduce it from 1.5 meters, which is about 5 feet, to 0.5. So it is going to move the building closer to the laneway, but the referral comments are that it won't impede the function of the laneway.
Thank you.
Okay, no further questions on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. DVP 168 2222 Lynn Laran Road. Staff recommendation of council direct staff to proceed with the required statutory notification for development variance permit DVP 168 at 2222 Lynn Laran Road.
Move the staff recommendation.
Seconder? Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. DVP 170 at 418 Fitzwilliam Street. It's requested ask that the council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to DVP 170. Anyone in attendance who would like to speak to matters related to DVP 170 in attendance?
The applicant is in attendance if council has any questions.
Okay, so are there any questions, seeing none at this point, concerning DVP 170?
Move that we issue the permit.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. DVP 179, I say again, DVP 171, rather, at 5480 Mildmay Road, rather. Staff recommendation that council direct staff to proceed with the required statutory notification for the development variance permit for DVP 171 at 5480 Mildmay Road. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. DVP 172 at 4235 Departure Bay Road. Staff recommendation that council direct staff to proceed with the required statutory notification for development variance permit DVP 172 at 4235 Departure Bay Road. Moved and seconded. Councillor Pachi.
Just want to take advantage of the opportunity to maybe remind staff to, if they can have a conversation with the Presbyterian Church, to possibly get that sign as far away from the controlled intersection and towards Country Club as possible. Sorry?
Well, that's okay. He has a contrary view, I believe. But anyway, Councillor Kipp.
Thank you, Worship. I'm wondering, I understand the safety issue, and we don't want to plug everybody's mind up with it. But if we move that farther away, am I the driver coming around the corner going, oh, look at that nice sign, and then I don't react to that next sign, where the way it's located now, I will actually see the sign and the sidewalk sign? So although it might be closer cluttered, which, and can you prove to me objectively that one would be safer than the other?
I suppose it depends what direction you're going from.
Well, yeah, which way you're going. But either one, if it was closer, you would see the stop or the pedestrian sign is my thing, that they all be there together. And whether that distracts or makes it easier to see, I'm not certain.
Okay, well, we have some more questions that might answer some of those things. Councillor Pachi. You're done again, Councillor Sherry.
Well, Mr. Chairman, one member of the community that uses that intersection on a daily usage, I have concern on the closeness of the new sign as it relates to the flashing sign that's there, okay? Because the thing is if one looks around the community and sees how many activated crosswalk signs that we have, and the brightness of the pulses of the light is very, very poor. And as I say, I would hope that when the consultants that are in the business of erecting signs would put it further away from Wausau and give a clearance between where that activated crosswalk sign is. There needs to be some separation in order to do that. And hopefully the individuals that they have looking at this will take the safety aspects in consideration when they do this.
Okay. Councillor Beswick.
I'll reserve comment, Your Worship. I was just thinking of direction. I'm wondering if it was left or right of center.
Okay, moving right along. We're going to DVP 173 at 22.
Did we have a vote?
Oh, sorry, we didn't vote. I was hurrying along rather too quickly on that one. Question, all in favor? Opposed? Okay, we won't get into the political view here. That the next one is DVP 173 at 2211 Jinglepot Road. Staff recommendation that council direct staff to proceed with the required statutory notification for development variance permit DVP 173 at 2211 Jinglepot Road.
So moved.
Moved and seconded?
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. DVP 174 at 5670 Ocean View Terrace. Staff recommendation that council direct staff to proceed with the required statutory notification for development variance permit DVP 174 at 5670 Ocean View Terrace. So moved. Seconder? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Move into unresolved building deficiencies. Notice on title, Section 5.7. It's requested that council herein wishing to speak with respect to unresolved building deficiencies / illegal suites for 4592 Sheridan Ridge Road. Is there anyone in attendance that would like to speak to matters related to 4592 Sheridan Ridge Road?
Move the staff recommendation.
Second, okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Request for proposal for fire engines. Staff recommendation that council direct staff to advertise and send requests for proposals to target apparatus manufacturers for the purchase of Type 1 fire engines. And could someone like to move this and second to get on the floor? Moved by Councillor Kipp. Are you moving it?
Yeah.
And second by Councillor Holden. Councillor Green, sorry. And for discussion, Councillor Kipp.
Yeah, Your Worship, I'd just like to ask, what's a Type 1 engine? Because I know they were trying to type every type of apparatus in the province, and like so when something shows up inside, your Type 1 was usually your biggest apparatus. Is this similar, or is this an NFPA standard Type 1?
I think you've pretty much nailed it, Councillor Kipp. Type 1 engine is a complement of water, hose, a pump, and with sufficient water capacity. So from the province of BC typing system, this is what would be a typical municipal engine.
It'll fit in the hall?
It will.
Okay, thank you.
Just for clarity, Chief, I wonder if you could just mention the numbers here, because we're asking for a request for proposals for manufacturers, plural, for purchase of Type 1 fire engines, plural. Is it more than one, and how many in total? Or is it simply...
Your Worship, on page 102 of the report, the report is suggesting that we put a request for a proposal to put a contract to build engines for the next 5 years from the same manufacturer. And of course, there's economies of scale with that proposal, in that the design work, the engineering that goes into these apparatus can be saved if we go down that road.
Okay, the reason for my question was simply those at home wouldn't understand that, but they don't have the background that we're fortunate enough to have. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you, Worship. Two of my questions have been asked in a comment already. We're then, Chief, proposing to make commitments for 2011, 2013, and 2014 with this RFP?
Your Worship, the commitments would be, the contract would be worded so that it's flexible. The city wouldn't have to purchase these apparatus, but it gives us the option to purchase the apparatus in future years within that 5-year period.
And second question, if I may, Your Worship, none of these units will have to be custom built in order to fit into our existing facilities?
Oh, Your Worship, that's true. They're a standard engine. If we look back to the engines that we have in service currently today, with the variety of ages they all follow a very similar configuration. And the plan is to keep that configuration and to look at a longer year contract. So in essence, while they're custom built per se to meet our specifications, there's nothing really special about them from a fire apparatus perspective.
Thank you, which leads me to another question that I was trying to wish to get at. So Type 1 engines, if an RFP for multiple engines over multiple years benefit by more units, greater savings, but the Type 1 engines are reasonably standard apparatus throughout the industry?
That's correct.
So it's a similar apparatus to what other cities and municipalities are currently ordering?
Yeah, Your Worship, I think if you look at every community, certainly every municipality has their likes and dislikes, depending on the size of the community, volunteer or career. So we've, over the years, have evolved and established a standard that works well in the city of Nanaimo. One being fairly short wheelbase is a criteria we like because of some of the smaller streets and the alleys that we have to go into. So those are the design features that would become custom to Nanaimo and custom to the actual manufacture of the apparatus itself. Having said that, though, it still follows a very general configuration of what a Type 1 engine would be.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Sherry.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, my question is, we're customizing and they're going to be carrying water. Is it going to be the opportunity to have a full tank of water and the weight of the vehicle with not only water but the other necessary equipment meets the weight standards for the road conditions in this community?
Your Worship, that's quite correct. They'll carry 500 gallons of water. The rating of the axles will all be consistent with the overall gross vehicle weight of the trucks, and certainly legal from provincial standards.
Well, it's just that other communities have run into the problem where it might be the weight of the water, but then when they start adding on additional equipment, it's additional weight, and it takes them out of that bracket. So I just wouldn't like to see us exceed and run into problems with transportation.
Yeah, Your Worship, very valid point, and I think this comes with the design of the apparatus. It certainly will be, the cabin chassis will actually be heavier than what the load will be at the end of the day, adding an element of safety for operation.
Okay, Councillor Johnstone.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to staff. In the report, Mr. Lambert, you've indicated that a 5-year renewable contract would provide significant savings to the city. Can you identify what those savings might be?
Absolutely, Your Worship. There's a number of savings that come with a contract. First, if you look at the work from a manufacturing perspective that needs to go into these, the specifications need to be developed in concert with the department, and that's an effort from a manufacturer point of view as well as the department point of view. The other aspect is the design and drawings and the engineering that goes into these. When you do it once with one contractor, over the course of the 5 years, there's significant savings there. There's also some other savings insofar as pre-construction meetings and those types of issues that we normally go through purchasing a single apparatus. So over the 5 years, by standardizing what we're purchasing, we'll actually see some saving to the city. Now, it's really hard to identify because the numbers at the end of the day really wouldn't show what the savings are, but we do speculate there's possibly anywhere from $50,000 to $75,000 savings by eliminating some of those steps in the manufacturing process.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just a question, Chief Lambert, that this doesn't involve a fixed price contract then. If we negotiated a contract over a 5-year period, are the units at a fixed price? Are they subject to cost of living adjustments, or how is that happen? What's the advantage other than getting a commitment?
Your Worship, they are subject to a fixed price. Certainly your first one is your fixed price. Typically in contracts of this nature, any adjustments in price are fixed to consumer price index or some other factor that's agreed upon by the two parties. And we'll be bringing that forward when after the request for proposal process.
Okay. Councillor Bestwick. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Unger. I'm sorry, Councillor Bestwick. You're next on it.
Thank you. This is starting to sound more and more like a custom build. I know you can't go on the corner car lot and go and pick off a fire engine, but certainly there has to be some uniformity in other cities across Canada, and the number of cities there are, some that are similar size to us where the requirements would be very much the same. I am wondering, and I don't know if it's possible to give a short explanation of the difference between a request for proposals and the old system of tenders, putting out, here's what we want and what is your price on it.
Your Worship, the specifications, they get into details of where you want each hose line outlet to be from the pump and all those types of issues. There is a lot of similarities between engines across the country, and for that matter across the continent. However, if you look at some of the specific requirements that we've put in our engines over time, we're actually probably improving the operation of them as we go. The other aspect with the difference between tendering and request for proposals, this gives us some flexibility in looking and working with manufacturers to actually come up with the most cost-effective unit at the end of the day. It also permits us to look at various details around what that 5-year contract would look like, and we'd select the unit based on the criteria that staff has established.
Also permits us to not purchase the fire engines in 2014 if council doesn't approve the budget, whereas if it was a tender, we'd be virtually committed.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you, Worship. Just wish to have clarification on the recommendation, and our manager, city manager, Mr. Kenny, might have answered part of it when he said 2014, but you didn't say 2013. And so my question then is the council direct staff to advertise and send requests for proposals to target apparatus manufacturers for the purchase of Type 1 fire engines, or is it for the purchase of a Type 1 fire engine? And the reason for that question is, are we doing an RFP for multiple, or are we doing an RFP for one? And if it is multiple, will it come back to us before we have to make the decision to purchase?
Your Worship, the reason for the recommendation is that if the intent is to look at a long-term contract, and the long-term contract would specify up to 3 engines within that 5-year period. So hence the wording in the recommendation. Now, it would we would also specify within the request for proposal, we'd certainly need to purchase a 2011 engine. In fact, the 2013 engine is part of the fleet replacement program. But if there was a delay in or budgetary issues around any of that, as the city manager spoke to, then we'd have the flexibility to delay that.
So delay is different than, so we're, by supporting this recommendation, we're supporting 3 engines between now and 2014.
That would be correct.
Supporting the pricing, however, the commitment to actually buy them in 2014 will not be made until we have the budget approval from council. But this will set the pricing.
If I can, just for follow-up, is that the only criteria for not proceeding with the contract, that the budget wasn't approved for that year? Or are there other reasons that the budget...
Well, that's the reason. That's the reason that I
think what it'll be contractually
most likely. But I think that we, from what the fire chief, I'll ask him to speak to the commitment. But I heard him say that and confirm that the city will have the right to not purchase the trucks at the time.
Okay. Councillor Greaves.
Thank you, Worship. I certainly support this request for the 3 of them. Remember now, we've got fire station number 6 going online fairly soon, and so I'm fully in support of this. But I'd be kicking myself if I didn't ask if they would be staffed with 4 personnel.
Well, Your Worship. That's our career engines. That's certainly our target, is to put as many staff on them as we possibly can, and that's the operational intent that we have. So I think as we move down the road, certainly they'll definitely have 4 seats, if not 5, and that's basically, I think, the goal that collectively we all have.
Thank you.
Councillor Patchy.
Thank you, Worship. To staff, if I may, the recommendation reads that Council directs staff to advertise and send requests for proposals. If my memory serves me correctly, the latest and newest ladder equipment came from the United States. Do we give preference to Canadian companies? Are there Canadian companies that can do things as well as foreigners?
Your Worship.
How far does this net go where you advertise?
Yeah, right now, I think there's, I know in BC there's one builder of fire apparatus, and actually all the cabin chassis are purchased from the U.S. I think the evolution of the fire engine industry over the years has seen the centralization of apparatus being built in the U.S. So typically we would see apparatus coming out of the U.S. Now, on the issue of your second point was around, I'm sorry, I lost the second point.
How far is this net being cast as far as advertising is concerned and in the request for proposals?
Yeah, basically what we have is a number of Canadian distributors that build and support the fire apparatus that they sell. So it would be done through all the primary apparatus manufacturers, and it would also be put on CivicNet for any smaller outfit that perhaps is just getting going to bid as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bessing.
Thank you, Richard.
You just popped over here. Oh, there you go.
It's an important matter for me. So with the said purchase in 2011 and 13, so 2 Type 1 engines, which are standard type, will that mean that the new long ladder snorkel truck that we just purchased be situated and located nearer where the likelihood of the buildings that it was originally intended to provide service to and its call-out time be located in a more convenient location? So in other words, if we're getting 2 Type 1 engines for 11 and 13, will that new large truck that we have out on Hammond Bay Road be located nearer to town, where part of the consideration for purchasing that was well intended?
Your Worship, certainly the engines that we're requesting here are part of the capital financial plan over the next 5 years. Insofar as what's known as the Skyarm, the latest aerial apparatus, the rationale of putting it out in one of the more distant stations was actually come from our operations leadership team, which is the captains and assistant chiefs, who collectively came up with that decision to put it out there. Now, the rationale is historically, if we look at the aerial that was downtown, the engine would respond to the incident first. When they saw that the aerial was required, there was no staff to take it, because we don't specifically staff the aerial. Putting it in a peripheral station, what that allows is that for incidents which require an aerial apparatus, any high building, apartment building, or any situation that, such as a rescue situation where that unit would be applicable, instead of that station taking the engine, they take the aerial. So short of staffing up and putting that 24/7, that would be the alternative to putting it into like a downtown station, for example. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, sure. Councillor Sherry.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the recommendation is seeking prices for vehicles. There's no commitment here to purchase 1, 2, or 3. Is that correct?
Your Worship, that's correct. This is authorization to move forward with a request for proposal. Once that proposal goes out, manufacturers will submit their proposals back in along with their prices. When that takes place and we select the best manufacturer based on a fairly structured criteria, then we'll be bringing that back to council for deliberation.
The recommendation after review will be brought forward.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move ahead with it. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move into Corporate Services General Election Bylaw 2011, number 7129. Staff recommendation that council receive the report pertaining to General Election Bylaw 2011, number 7129, which is presented under the bylaw section of the agenda. Okay, moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moved into information items. There are none. And reconsideration of bylaws. Councillor Kip.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Fire Protection and Life Safety Amendment Bylaw 2011, number 7108.01, to replace Schedule A of the bylaw, be adopted.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Introductions of bylaws?
Please.
A1, the General Election Bylaw 2011, number 7129, to provide for the use of an automated voting system and establish various procedures for the conduct of local government elections and other voting, passed first reading.
Second. Moved and seconded. No discussion. Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Worship. Just clarification from staff, please, on what is intended by automatic or automated voting system, and if it's singular, will there be other alternatives for people to vote?
The processes that we'll be using for this election are the same as we've used in the past with the voting machines, and that's what this is referring to.
Thank you.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
The General Election,
sorry, go ahead.
The General Election Bylaw 2011, number 7129, passed second reading.
Second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Go ahead.
And move the General Election Bylaw 2011, number 7129, passed third reading.
Second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. And move into actually down into the other business now. There's, unless there's any other notices of motion for number 18, anyone have one? And if not, we'll move into 19, other business, and 19A. Councillor Holt.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move that Council reconsider the following motion adopted at the regular meeting of Council held 2011, June 13th. It was moved and seconded that Council direct staff to prepare the necessary documents to hold a referendum regarding borrowing for the water treatment plant in conjunction with the local general election on 2011, November 19th. To get it on the floor.
Okay, is there a seconder?
No, sir.
Move and seconded. Discussion. Councillor Oldham, do you have any further to add?
Yes, Your Worship. I'd just like to say that normally I support referendum opportunities. I think that as an expression of direct democracy, they're a good check on representative democracy from time to time, and besides, we're required to have them when it involves borrowing funds over a certain time period. But I must say that this is a very strange and unique situation we find ourselves in here, where we have one provincial government agency, VIHA, in effect ordering us to do something, and having the authority to do that. It's not exactly an order, it's an amendment to the water license, but we must do it. And we have Municipal Affairs in Victoria saying that we must have a referendum. So we're in this odd situation where you really can't vote no. So what kind of direct democracy is that? If the community voted no, we would simply be ordered to do it anyway. The only kind of choice that appears here is that we either borrow, which is fairly attractive right now at low interest rates and so on, or we double the water rates in order to pay for this facility. It just seems to me that it's worse than not having a referendum would be to have a phony referendum, a pretense of democracy, if you like. And I think we should defeat this motion so that we can get on to a more pragmatic way of getting through this difficulty.
Your Worship?
Yes.
Just for clarification, that this particular motion that's on the floor is just to decide whether or not to bring forward that motion for reconsideration.
Thank you.
Yes, so I'm speaking in favor of reconsideration.
Okay, we have Councillor Unger.
I think I'll wait once we decide whether to reconsider. I also support reconsideration.
Okay, Councillor Pat. Oh, they're dropping away. Councillor Beswick.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question to Councillor Holden. I was just wondering which motion you were asking us to vote. If you were asking us to vote on your motion, or
well, maybe just for clarification.
I probably jumped the gun a little.
That's fine, but maybe can you just clarify it for us, Ms. Harrison?
The motion on the floor is to reconsider the motion, so it's whether or not Council wishes to reconsider. If Council approves this motion to reconsider, then you would vote again on the motion that was adopted at the last meeting.
Thank you. So there's no new motion. You're just asking us to reconsider the motion that was approved at the last meeting that you weren't in attendance at.
Yes.
Well, and subsequent to that, I assume, will you be making it an amended motion, or is it just?
Well, let's do the recall first, and then.
But I think he should know. And
all right. Sure.
Just to explain, as I understand it, this motion would come back on the floor. If Council chose to defeat it, then I would bring forward another motion to use the alternative approval process. But only if Council defeated this motion on a second vote.
Then, Your Worship, if I may have a follow-up, then what I learned at our last session when we voted on this was even if the alternate approval process isn't successful, we still have time to do a referendum. So if we do the alternate approval process without the desired result, whatever that depends on, without the desired result, then what I learned at our last session was that we would simply hold a referendum then.
Your Worship, that would be up to Council. Council could accept that the alternate approval process decision is the decision that they believe is the will of the people, and decide to implement the higher user rates to pay for the water treatment plant instead of debt. So you could accept that at that point, or you could say you want to have another go at it and have the whole electorate involved and have a referendum. That would be your choice.
So if I may then, Your Worship, so the alternate approval process is the process that would cost us more money than putting it on a referendum ballot at the election.
Ms. Harrison, do you want to comment?
Your Worship, the estimated cost for the alternative approval process is in the neighborhood of $2,500 for advertising.
No.
The cost for advertising for a referendum are probably 3 times that. At least there's considerably more advertising that would be required for a referendum. But I haven't got the exact numbers, but I'm assuming it would be an additional 6,000 or so, plus the staff time for both processes.
Well, that's not very much money.
Okay. Councillor Holden, did you have something else?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I didn't.
Councillor Sherry.
Well, Mr. Chairman, let's get the figures correct, eh? Because the thing is you run an ad in the newspaper that you're going the alternative method. Okay, and then the community has the opportunity of collecting a petition, and staff would have to print up the necessary ballots that would be needed for people to sign up to be returned. Then staff, their time's not free, are going to have to expend considerable amount of time checking those petitions against my understanding is make sure that they live within the city boundaries and tally them up and come up with a report. Now, that doesn't come free. So if we go to a full referendum, as staff identified, yeah, you're going to be doing a little more advertising. And when you go into the media, the cost of advertising, as we've heard before, is not inexpensive. So I think, when you want to look at apples and apples, look at apples and apples. Never mind grapes and grapefruits.
Mr. Kenney, would you like to comment?
Just to add information that if council decides to proceed with a referendum, there certainly will be significantly higher, in my view, communication costs with the public, both staff time and expert advice on a communications plan to ensure that the council's intention is clearly communicated to the public and that they fully understand the options before them and the costs and implications of the water treatment plant.
Okay. Councillor Apache.
Well, I would just like to ask Mr. Kenning then, if this council decided to go the alternative approval method, does that not involve the education of the public and a certain amount or an equally large amount of expert advice and education and so on and so forth?
It's my opinion, Your Worship, that a referendum requires a much higher level of community debate and interaction and will put a much higher workload on staff and a much higher demand for communication information.
Your Worship.
Okay, Council, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. We are getting into the if situation, if we proceeded with that, but I think it might impact on how people vote on the reconsideration. And I would just like to say that if Council defeats this motion, I will be bringing forward a motion that does call for an education campaign that would be at least as vigorous as one that would be in a regular referendum, because I think that's one of the real benefits from the motion that was made 2 weeks ago, is that there has been a public discussion. We should be engaged in that, and both VIHA and the city should be providing as much information as possible so that people can make an informed choice no matter what the process. So I guess I'm disagreeing with the advice we're getting from staff at this point. In fact, I think the alternative approval process, if anything, requires more public communication, not less.
Okay, I see no further questions on it. So on the motion as put forward by Councillor Oldham for reconsideration, all those in favour? Opposed? Councillor Sherry and Councillor Apache opposed. Balance of council in favour. The motion passes.
And that means
Councillor Oldham. Oh, sorry. Before you do, Councillor Oldham, I'm sorry. Ms. Harrison, is there a comment you want to make at this point? Or are you?
Yes.
No. At this time, it would be appropriate to bring forward the motion that was carried at the last meeting to vote on that again.
Okay.
In fact, it's on the floor.
It is on the floor, and was it seconded as well? The motion. Okay, so it's on the floor, and sorry.
So, as I understand it, Your Worship. The motion that is now on the floor is that Council directs staff to prepare the necessary documents to hold a referendum regarding borrowing for the water treatment plant in conjunction with the local general election on November 19th. Just the one that's printed on our green sheets.
Yeah.
And that was the one that was passed 2 weeks ago. So that's now on the floor for another vote.
Okay, but that's not the, this is if it goes to referendum.
Yeah, so it's only voting on whether we do this.
Revote the last. Okay. Councillor, we got a bunch of Councillor Beswick. Do you have something on it?
I understood in not debate necessarily, but in discussion, that if we defeated this motion, that Councillor Holden was going to come back with a new motion.
Yes.
So what I just heard is the same motion. I didn't hear a new motion. Just where it's a new vote on the exact same motion.
Yes, we need to defeat that in order to have a new motion come forward.
Okay, you're on the list. So just for the benefit of those that are wiggling their fingers around here, I have Councillor Sherry, Councillor Paget, Councillor Kipp, Councillor Oldham, well, next is Councillor Sherry.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I received an email this afternoon, and it's dated May 9th, 2011, and it was from the ministry as it relates to this issue, and it was addressed to staff. And nowhere in that 2-page document do I see any mention of this alternate approval authorization. Because when I read this here, it says here, when a public health threat is so imminent that in order to install water treatment work is necessary, there's not sufficient time to follow the regular process of borrowing approval. Under these circumstances, the regulation removes the requirement for public approval. Okay, I'm advised that they jump down a portion of a sentence. In the case of the city of Nanaimo, there's no immediate health threat that an order would not be appropriate. Now, when I read within this document that there needs to be a decision made, they don't differentiate between a referendum and that. I mean, if they were going to say that an alternate method would be acceptable, why wouldn't they put that in there?
Your Worship, when they use the term referendum, they interchangeably mean either an assent of the elector process, alternate assent to elector process, or a regular assent to elector process. And that's set out in the legislation, and that option is available to council. They just use the word elector approval, which can mean either, and it's up to council to decide whether you want to use the alternative process or the regular process.
Well, it seems kind of odd that they wouldn't specify, especially with the problems that they've been having as it relates to other issues within the whole province, not just the city of Nanaimo.
Councillor Paget.
Well, I'm getting a little muddled here. Are we still on reconsidering what we approved 2 weeks ago? We haven't.
Yes, basically. Well, what happens
on this motion again?
Okay.
The motion, yes, is the one that we considered last time. It's up for reconsideration now, to either accept or reject.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. Councillor Kipp, is this something you want to beat up on too?
I don't want to muddy the water.
Okay. Councillor Holden, did you have something you want to muddy the water?
Sorry.
Councillor Besser, did you want to muddy the water here? Where are we here? Sure. Are you on still from last time? Or
No, sure, why not?
Okay.
Well, when we had the two delegations that spoke to the systems, the treatment systems, and I realized that we're a certain way down the road. But you know, when the more that we learn about UV and chlorination, and we're talking about unprotected, and we're protected, and we're talking about places that there's boats and boat gas and oil and people swimming and all kinds of other things and fishing and all in an unprotected, that they're going to have an opportunity to experiment with UV and chlorination. Chlorination we already do. We've already gone down the road where we're going to have this membrane, and if I recall when the engineer was here, he said the membrane may only last 10 years. And I think the membrane to replace it was $2+ million. So it's costing us $200,000 a year, and then knowing that we're going to have to even replace this membrane in 10 years, and 10 years probably thereafter. But then I'm assuming that the technology might get better, and it might be 11 or 12 years. So when we have more and more costs associated with this treatment plant than just the original cost going in, And then when I hear that we can transfer funds, so we're looking within this as well to how to finance this, and we can transfer funds within our organization so as not to put this burden onto the taxpayer, or the 100% of the burden that's our responsibility when we have reserves available. And I've been under the understanding that we aren't in, either A, we don't have those reserves available, or if we do, we can't transfer them.
Your Worship, on the issue of the funds, yes, you can borrow funds from the sewer fund or the general fund to fund this water project, but you do have to pay it back. But you have to have monies to borrow, and it's our opinion that the sewer fund monies are needed for sewer projects, to fund things like Green Lake and other unserviced areas, and to improve the infrastructure when it fails. And it's also our opinion that the general fund is fully committed as well. So you have to actually have money in those banks to borrow from, and in our opinion, there isn't sufficient money in those banks. On the issue of Comox, it's our opinion that the circumstances here are different than the circumstances in Comox, although it is up to the health authority to justify their regulations. Staff have spoken to them and can advise you on what we have heard. However, it is information from them. It is not our information.
Thank you, Mr. Kenning, Your Worship. Comox is, as Councillor Bestwick explained, experimenting. They're hoping that they will be able to get away with deepening their intake and UV disinfection, in the hopes of, if you'll notice when Mr. Taylor had the slide up, it said deferring filtration. That didn't mean avoiding filtration. So Comox is required to have UV disinfection within the next year or so, and then in future, after significant testing, they need to prove to VHA that they can defer filtration until some future date. But it does not mean, and that still needs to be accepted by VHA after their testing, so they're risking. So.
Thank you. And so in our case, is that because we are in such poor condition? Is that because we have so many medical issues and so many concerns about our current supply of water? Or is that an ideological situation where we might have a problem, and because we might have one, and there might be a catastrophic earthquake every 400 years, that we must do that? Like, we've heard that we've had 2 to 4 boil water advisories in 2 decades. Do we anticipate doubling that number in the next 5 to 10 years? Tripling it? Is there any scientific data to support that if we don't do this, we will likely have an epidemic?
That's a question that can really be only answered by the regulators. However, the city has had, yes, 2 boil water advisories over the last half dozen years or so. But we have had many instances where the turbidity in the water exceeds the permitted amount under the regulations. So the VHA chose during those times not to implement a boil water advisory. It doesn't mean that the water wasn't having significant turbidity and that was a concern to the health authorities. It is, however, their issue to provide the regulations, and that's the regulations we're recommending that Council follow.
Well, that's nice, but it wasn't such a concern for them to issue a boil water edict. So it couldn't have been that. Otherwise, I suspect they would have. So
Your Worship,
it complicates me.
Those are questions that need to be addressed by VHA.
Okay, but maybe, Mr. Sims, if I can, just for maybe a little bit of clarity, if you'll pardon the expression, they have, one of the issues is that at the present time, the city is chlorinating the water and passing it through a filter, a very fine mesh filter.
Well,
and what additional work is done on the water other than those 2?
Currently, to the the water itself, Your Worship, they even wouldn't refer to it as a filter. I'd call it a screen. And there's just maybe a technical difference. The real form of treatment that we have is purely only chlorination. So as far as physical work to the water, that is what's done.
And so, in your opinion, do you think that what VIHA is asking us to improve the quality of filtration on the water, if you wish, is reasonable?
VIHA is simply following other areas provincially and across the continent in asking us to meet the Canadian Drinking Water Quality Guidelines in providing 2 types of treatment.
Okay. Councillor Kipp.
Thank you, Your Worship. The power of a referendum is important, I think, from a public perspective. People buy into the process at that point. But I look in the executive summary that we did receive, the document from the government, and the one they say is great. The public process to approve debt is usually associated with a project that is of local discretion. This project, mandated by provincial permit requirement, will be built. Accordingly, any suggestion that public has discretion in this project will appear to be disingenuous on the part of the city and on the part of the province. My part of this, there's 2 parts. VIHA wants a process acceptable to VIHA under the Canadian Drinking Water Standards. They unilaterally changed our license. They did. And so then the other part of this is staff's recommendation. There's 3 possibilities for water filtration. UV and chlorine, a mixed system, a DAF system, or what is it, dissolved air, flotation, or membrane. Our staff, so VIHA is getting tagged in here, and I'm not one of VIHA's best friends. They don't phone me all the time just to tell me I'm doing a good job. This is also staff recommending this new process that is unproven. We don't know the cost of its operation over its green gold lifetime. Right, we're up there. So in a time when we all talk small systems, sustainable systems, we're passing on a recommendation by our professional staff for one of the most expensive unproven systems. Other people have gone to UV, and other people have gone to dissolved air flotation methods. So there's a number of ways to do it. But we've chosen, through our staff, this membrane system, and there is $2 million switch out, and a number of panels can be switched out over time. I'm really concerned at this referendum thing on an individual issue for me. Our sewer system's failing. We've had a number of failures. And I think we've only had 2 boil water events in the history of our water system. I'm talking from 1874. We've had 2 boil water orders, I believe. That's on our website for history. So from my perspective, this whole pretense of going to the public and saying, hey, look, you got to do this, do you want to vote? What if they say no? Then we've been totally disingenuous. So we got megaliters pouring out the end of our pipes. We don't have bulk water metering in all of our system, and we're a metered system. I mean, we got $19 million of sewer promises. We've got $5 million a year where we're not meeting our infrastructure needs right now. You know where this is leading, don't you? 40. Yeah.
Okay.
So my thing on this one is I don't support the referendum because I believe it's a kind of phony process of the government that's kind of pushing us through. We're kind of wasting money. We've been ordered. This is ultimately the effect of the change in the permit has the same effect as an order. Non-compliance is not an option for the municipality. According to the province insertion of the permit condition, it triggers us with a regulation and we have to do it. So that's right off their executive summary. So what are we doing? Going to spend money on we got referendums. Like, I'd like to see the referendum, are you willing to spend all these money on all these projects? Remember in the paper we just said about all of our buildings that we got to buck up with, and we're doing them one at a time without piecemeal growth. And I think we've chosen an expensive system, and the process is flawed if we go to the public and say, oh yeah, do you want this to happen? Although I agree with the processes that people support referendums. The other process, that alternative approval thing, I think that's one of the biggest scams that was ever put in just to fly things through. So That's my opinion.
No,
I won't be voting for this.
Do all these people need to be heard before we vote, or do we ready to vote? Or
Your Worship, I'd like to make a comment because I think there was a suggestion or a question about the system chosen for the filtration, and Councillor Kipp is right that the city staff have been involved in selecting the process, as has a firm of engineers that have a great deal of experience in this area. And what was done in the process of selecting the type of filtration was that multiple systems were modeled using our exact water supply here, because it was important to select a system that worked for the water that's found on the Nanaimo River watershed. And several systems were modeled, and council itself was invited to observe and participate and view the modeling, and the recommendation was made by the engineers, supported by staff, that the membrane filter system was the most suitable for this water. And long-term costs were examined. All of these filtration systems have high costs, but the long-term costs, both social, environmental, and as well, of course, money, the financial costs, were all compared, and this system was recommended by all of the people involved in the process. So I think it's important that this process just wasn't selected through a quick or easy process. It was a lengthy technical process that involved many experts. Mr. Hickey, did you have comments?
I'd like a follow-up. So this is a proven system. It's in place in other places, and they know. And did we have an operating cost estimate on that? What's our yearly operating estimate?
The yearly operating estimate for the plant the entire plant is about $1.8 million, including the staff time and everything. But if council will recall, last fall, we came to you, and that was after we did extensive water piloting through the last spring and summer. We actually went to some of the water treatment plants that have exactly those types of filtration. They actually are very effective and are pretty common in the industry right now. We looked at both capital costs and long-term operating costs, and these membrane systems are effective because they use a whole lot less chemical through the process, and so we can really treat our water. And maybe some of the councillors can even answer some of those questions, because a lot of you actually went and visited the system and had a look, and were quite happy with how it was working. So it is a really good system and quite reliable.
How many did we tour?
No, we toured with the engineer.
About 6 or 7.
Yeah, and council went and looked at the sand filters, the modified sand filter and the membrane filter, and heard all the technical information.
Okay, I have Councillor Panchi, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Sherry, Councillor Unger, Councillor Oldham. You're next. Well, sorry, I just took you off again. You're on now.
Thank you. So I need to reestablish for my own sake what it is that we're talking about. We have selected a system. We've talked about it for about a year. We've spent about $3 million. We have selected a membrane system after all the expert advice that we got, and I have no argument with that. We were told and reminded in a communication of May the 9th of this year by the Inspector of Municipalities that there are differences around the province of British Columbia as to what may be required by an operating permit based on local circumstances. So that to me explains the difference between Comox Lake and our situation for it. So I have no argument with that either. I do have a problem, especially after what I heard tonight, about the educational part of what then would be deficient in my mind as far as an alternative approval method is concerned. Basically, there are 4 ways that the citizens of Nanaimo can pay for this money that needs to be borrowed. We can have a debenture loan, which is what the question is really all about. We can increase the water rates by 200% over the next couple of years. We can 100%. We can increase property taxes if we need to come up with the money. And then there's also this suggestion by using a parcel tax, I believe, that would select certain properties to pay a certain amount also for a couple of years. So there are other ways of dealing with this. And my really big worry about the alternate approval method and what I heard tonight was that we are not going to explain that as well as we should. And if we are going to explain in a proper referendum that those basically are the only 4 options that exist, there really is very little of any doubt in my mind that the citizens of Nanaimo would select anything other than to borrow the 22.5, because the rest is really not very appetizing. Then you have this so-called intergenerational aspect. And I think that's very important for us to remember as well, that with the borrowing and the repayment of that loan, it is not only the people who use it today and have the benefit today, but also those in the future who will be paying for that. So again, the question of borrowing the money is not an issue for me. How we get the assent of the electors is a huge issue for me. And I'm sorry I haven't heard anything tonight that will lead me to change my mind that an alternate process is more democratic and more to the point than a proper referendum question. And particularly when that alternate process would take place in the month of July and August, when everybody's on holidays and they have other things on their mind. I just don't think it's appropriate, and so I shall not be supporting that.
Okay, Councillor Unger.
Thank you, Your Worship. We are getting hung up here on process. We know that we have to spend this money. We have no option. So basically making the referendum a charade in effect. I don't like the alternative approval process, but in this case, I see it as the least expensive, because when we tell people, well, you get to vote on this, but it doesn't matter how you vote, we have to spend the money anyway, that to me makes it a charade. I think it's very clear we have to spend the money. That is not in question, and we have decided we're going to go ahead with the treatment plant. That's not a question. So the question is, do we do it by borrowing, which we have to approval for, or a massive increase in water rates, which would be a doubling over a couple of years, or the other process that Councillor Pachi mentioned. So to me, since it doesn't matter how people vote in a referendum, I think we should use the easiest and least involved process. And as I said, I don't like the alternative approval process, but in this case, when it doesn't mean anything and it's totally phony, I think we should use the easiest one to get it out of the way and move on and get this done, because, as I said, we're running around in circles here on process, and it's clear and plain what we have to do.
Well, we've got a couple more too, but I just want to quickly add the same. I feel much the same. I'm not sure the alternate approval process is in most circumstances the most desirable way to go. In this particular case, I think it is, only in that it's the most expedient way of doing it. We can get an earlier decision on this matter. Let's not forget that the council has already approved, and staff, I think, has spent something in the neighborhood of $3 million on this project. We've been a year, possibly a year and a half down the road on it, and some of it is a little bit concerning that we're asking questions that I'm sure were asked a year ago. When we have a mandate from the province of British Columbia to improve the filtration system that we're using, to think of ways to avoid that. Remember, the health authority may issue an operating permit that requires installation of treatment for the reliability of a water system and the safety of a community, and that also is meant to mean that they can suspend the operating permit at any time should they feel that we're not complying with the regulations they've imposed. And in that case, we're in a real tough situation. So I will be supporting the alternate approval process myself. Councillor Oldham.
No.
Did you have something? And then Councillor Graves? I have only 2 left.
I haven't.
Rest of, are you on there?
Well, thank you.
Well, then you died on the vine here.
Well, Lloyd, do you want to go first? I don't
want to go first. You go then.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I have a little difficulty. It's VHA that is putting these regulations on our current water supply. Is that correct? Yes or no?
Yes, these regulations are stipulated by the Vancouver Island Health Authority.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, we have been working on a process on an emergency supply of water. Has there been a discussion between staff and VHA as it relates to this emergency water?
No. Maritan, no.
Okay, so here we are in a dilemma. We're spending money on trying to achieve an emergency source of water should we ever need it. It hasn't had any discussion with VHA as it relates to where that source is within the system or anything like that. And should we need to tap into that emergency, what happens to the filtration system? To the best of my knowledge, the information that I've received is that we're talking about a filtration system which is to be located in the vicinity of Southwest Extension.
Your Worship, we're working under the assumption that an emergency system is just that. It's for an emergency. And we think in an emergency, the public can expect that there may be some inconvenience and it may be required that if they want to have potable water, they may have to boil. So it's possible that the regular treatment programs that are available for 99.999% of the time may not be available in an emergency, or the emergency supply may not be filtered. But we think that that's a situation that the public would accept in an emergency.
And that's why my argument is for this filtration system, if it's such a need, you just identified 99.9%. So 0.1% is the tip and the edge of this thing. And the thing is that there needs to be a sales job, and we need to do a terrific sales job to explain to the general public the cost of this $22 million of borrowing, or whatever it is. We're going to have to get our financial guru to see and try to forecast what that would be in over the 20-year period as to what the costs are on that 20-year period. We're already started to increase our water rates 5% per year to cover some of these costs of future supply and that within there. So the thing is who pays for it, today or for the future? And I think that's the important part of a referendum, is that you sell it on the future. Because, we're talking about democracy. Well, you go this alternate approval. Once again, if that's such the thing, why didn't we start this last October, November, so that we would be able to explain to the people and have a period of time where everybody's concentrating on their financial, personal conditions right now. You start putting this thing down, and this is where it really smells, is when you start going into July and August and that, when there's other things that are going on in this community that takes priority over whatever that there is. And that's why the motion was put forward the last time, is go to referendum. Because if the plebiscite or the anti-petition goes down, then we're going to go through another process of the referendum?
No. Yeah.
You're going to have to do it.
Why?
Why?
Okay, well, let's not get into debate here on that. The next one I have is Councillor Hold'em. I have Councillor Hold'em, Councillor Greaves, Councillor Bestwick. Councillor...
Well, Your Worship, we may be approaching a time when we can have this vote. I'm hearing many reasons from around the table for voting against the motion that's on the floor, which is to hold this referendum. Not only that it seems to be an example of phony democracy, but also because there may be other ways to pay for this, or some members of our council have in mind other ways of paying for this besides borrowing, so you'd vote against this motion for that reason as well. And others seem to believe that we may not need the water treatment plant at all, which of course is a very strong reason for voting against this motion, since you wouldn't want to have a referendum on borrowing money for something you don't think is actually necessary to do. I would just like to point out that we could vote against this motion and the next motion. The only reason we're considering referendum at all is to keep alive the option of borrowing funds for this project. That's the only thing that these referendums accomplish. And so we've just got a choice about which way to do it. The motion that's on the floor delays it until the general election. The one that would be coming up if we defeat this motion would get the alternative approval process moving along. That's all.
Councillor Greaves.
Thank you, Worship. Safe drinking water is very important. I'm sure we all agree. I grew up on the mouth of the Niagara River, and we got our water from the Niagara River. And remember, this is the 50s and the 60s. The water came from Buffalo and Cleveland and Niagara Falls and the Love Canal. It's amazing I don't have three eyes. Anyway, I saw Lake Ontario die. We were clubbing the fish as they came to the top of the water because there was no oxygen. And my children were allowed to swim, but they couldn't put their heads under the water because of infection. So I'm not suggesting that this will ever come to that here. But the only thing we're talking about here, as far as I'm concerned, is how we're going to raise the $22.5 million. Remember, we've already spent much has been said, so I'm going to keep this very short. We've already spent the $3 million. We've got the $43 million in reserves all ready to go. We need to borrow 22.5. These reserves might disappear. I'm not sure if that's the case. If we wait for another 5 or 10 years for this project, and I'm assuming sooner or later this will have to come on stream, the cost of the water treatment plant may be $100 million, $150 million. So I supported the referendum my friend Councillor Padgey passed last time, or suggested last time. And I supported it because of the educational reason. But, it is false democracy. I see I'm not really changing my vote, but we are going to raise the money one way or the other. Let's get on with it, and we'll go to the alternate approval process. I'm not a fan of it either, but I think that's what we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Besson Johnson, is this something that we're going to be around again, or we do this briefly here?
Well, I just want to make a comment.
Because I think we should have a vote on this now.
Sure, but I'll just make a comment first. that we've identified 4 options for funding or the project. One thing we haven't discussed is deferring other projects. If this is such a priority, and this is considered, as Councillor Greaves just said, such a priority as VHA has informed us, that this is a massive undertaking and a massive project. When I hear us say that we're down the road, we've already spent $3 million. We've been down the road and spent $3 million on other capital projects that we finally woke up and went, enough's enough. And so to me it was a good time to stop spending. All we're talking about right now is capital improvements. And when I heard that I just have a question to Mr. Hickey. Once this is fully built out, you mentioned, I think, that our increased operation expenses for this system will be $1.8 million per year?
Yes, that's the estimate.
The estimate. So given that that's an estimate, so we can round up to a couple of $1 million a year once this is in place?
Right now, we're actually working on a staffing plan with these membranes that we may not have to staff as heavily. So hopefully you can round down a bit, but we're in that neighborhood, 1.8 million a year to operate.
Okay, Councillor Johnstone, we'll give you the final word.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I believe, and I think we all believe, that this water treatment plant will benefit this community for generations to come. I understand that VHA is making these restrictions or regulations under the Canada Water Safety Act, or can mandate it under the Water Safety Act. But I'm just curious to know, and I think Councillor Holdham touched on it, but the taxes or the water rates would not just double if this referendum failed. It would double over a period of 2 to 3 years. Is that correct, Mr. Kenning?
Yes, Your Worship, they would have to be doubled for a 2 to 3 year period, and then they would potentially could go back to their regular level. Because the point is that we would need to raise the $22 million in time to spend it on building the plant, because with debt you can get the money now and pay it back over time, but if you're paying cash for the facility, you have to get that money at the time you're going to pay the contractor. So we'd have to raise the rates in advance of the project, and then potentially they could go back down after.
So it's not the current, just today's taxpayers, it's taxpayers for generations down the road that would be taking the load of this burden, to construct this plant, which I think is important.
Okay, Councillor Sherry is going to get the last word.
Mr. Chairman, the last comment about what the costing is, isn't it within the Municipal Act or Local Government Act or whatever we go, that we could go and borrow money for up to a 5-year period without having to go to a referendum?
Your Worship, there are limitations in the ability of a local government under the community charter to borrow for a restricted period, and so we'd have to probably get back to council on that, or we could maybe look at that for the next couple of minutes.
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman, is that we'd have to pay it back within a 2-year period, or collect the money in that 2-year period. Well, if we have the opportunity to go to the market for other things and not have to go to referendum, as long as we pay that debt off within that 5-year period, I just wonder, are we apples and oranges? Thank you.
Question.
Well, Your Worship, that would, staff are checking to see what the current state of legislation is, but if that is permitted, of course, it would have to be paid back in 5 years, which would mean you'd have to have the increase, at least a 20% increase in water rates to cover that.
Not arguing that, Mr. Kenning, it's just a matter of the percentage per year, as it related there was 50% per year, where it's a difference of 20% over a 5-year period.
Good question. Okay, Mr. Holmes, did you have a comment?
Your Worship, we think that we probably could put council in a position to borrow it over 5 years. The current program of increasing water rates at 5% per year were modeled to cover debenture debt, and so much like paying for it currently out of cash, borrowing it over 5 years would still require a significant increase, well in excess of 5%. We haven't done that modeling, but as Mr. Kenning said, it would be a pretty steep increase for the period of 5 years.
Okay, so there's a motion. Yeah, there's a motion on the floor. And do you want to maybe have another go at it, Ms. Holm? Because we've sort of been around the mulberry bush a few times here. So,
yeah,
the motion on the floor is simply the one that we have before us, that council directs staff to prepare the necessary documentation to hold a referendum regarding borrowing of the water treatment plant in conjunction with the local general election 2011, November 19th.
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay. Question on the motion. All those in favor? We have Councillor Paggi and Councillor Sherry opposed, and we have the balance of council opposed. The motion fails. Okay. Here we go. Councillor Holden.
Then, given that result, Your Worship, I'd move, and this is the same motion that staff recommended to council 2 weeks ago, with an addition. I'd move 1, that council receive the report pertaining to water treatment plant loan authorization bylaw 2011 number 7127. 2, establish a deadline of 4:30 p.m. on Wednesday, August 31st for receiving elector responses for the alternative approval process in relation to the loan authorization bylaw. 3, approve the elector response form as attached to the report. Number 4, determine the total number of electors of the area to which the approval process applies, the whole of the city of Nanaimo, to be 62,687. And 5, invite VHA to participate in an education campaign to ensure the public is well informed about this issue.
Second motion.
And Your Worship, there may be some reasons for voting against this too. If we've already voted against one type of,
we're going to vote against?
Yes.
Just want to clarify that.
Just saying that, if there are other options and we don't want to keep open this particular borrowing option, we really don't need a referendum. I think most of the reasons for using the approval process are based on pragmatism and expediency. It is simply a way of moving through this. But I would say that it works. Councillor Paggi proved 3 years ago that this process works. So it is democratic, it can work, and I think we would, at our peril, ignore a negative result on this. If we use this process and 10% of the people say, no, we don't want to borrow the money for that purpose, I think we would have to respect that and not automatically go to a full referendum. So I think it's a worthwhile process and it keeps an option open for us.
Well, Councillor Holden, I am impressed because Councillor Paggi looks like he's in shock here, so we'll just carry on. But some valid points, but I think Councillor Paggi did prove by a very arduous job of collecting something like 7,000 signatures on a petition. It can be done, but it's a huge amount of work. Okay. Councillor Kipp.
Does the number of people determined for this include the external areas that we service with water? Because we service more than Nanaimo, don't we?
This process applies to the electors of the city of Nanaimo.
So the other people that use our water and get our water have no say in it. Right? Don't anyone ever think I was against filtration. It's the process we've arrived at it.
Councillor Sherry.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if this fails, I think the other thing is that, has been suggested, that there would be a referendum held at the time of election, to try it once again.
Okay. Councillor Patchy.
Your Worship, I just wanted to reassure Councillor Holdham that he's not going to find me on the seawall in July and August. Having said that, though, and very seriously, though, I wonder if there is not another way of wordsmithing your fourth bullet, in that we make absolutely sure that we get the same amount of public education that we would have had there been a referendum. That's really important.
You don't have to comment if you want, but we have, Ms. Harrison, just for clarification, did you get the whole motion? It was quite a lengthy motion, and I was wondering if you captured it all?
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay. So, question on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillors Beswick and Councillor Sherry, Councillor Kipp opposed, balance of council in favor. Motion passes. Do you agree? Thank you.
Your Worship?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Your Worship. Given that motion has carried, I was wondering if I could ask Council to give the bylaw third reading. That would allow us to proceed. So the bylaw that was given first and second reading at the last meeting was Water Treatment Plant Loan Authorization Bylaw 2001, number 7127, and I've provided copies to members of Council. They will have it in front of them right now. And if I could ask that Council pass third reading on that bylaw.
So I have to read this out. You want me to read the whole thing again, or just a portion of it?
Just the name of it.
That Water Treatment Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2011, number 7127, pass third reading.
Second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? We have
It had
Councillor
already done first and second, had it
Councillor
not?
Sherry and Councillor Beswick opposed. And
I was opposed.
I have only those two opposed. Are you opposed?
Opposed.
And Councillor Kipp opposed.
I moved it.
Councillor Taylor. Okay, so we'll go down into the one delegation has been pulled, so we have only question period. Agenda items only.
Frederick.
Taylor, Emery Way. Would these new fire trucks have foam air type of apparatus on board like the last two for the latest type of firefighting?
I think Chief Lambert is on his way down to deal with that very question.
Your Worship, the engines will have foam capacity. I don't think the committee's decided yet whether it'll be compressed air foam or the typical foam systems that we have on other apparatus.
And as we're streamlining, in my words, please, the purchase or this type of fire engines, could the reconsideration, because we've had 3 latest fire halls, of the next one maybe using the plans of one? In other words, let's stream the plans for building fire halls?
Yeah,
well,
part of it
we
too,
keep developing new plans for every fire hall we build. Can we not build a second one even the same as the last 3?
Oh, I see. That's, I think,
Your Worship, I think we do definitely learn from every fire hall we build and build in the efficiencies that we learn. But one of the things to be aware is that the last hall was built in Chase River, and it was Council's policy to build in accordance with the Chase River Neighborhood Plan and the design guidelines for Chase River, which included the Finnish agrarian motif. And so the circumstances in Chase River were different, and that instruction was provided to the architect of the time.
I've heard tonight about emergency water. And if you go back to all the engineers' reports with Greater Nanaimo Water Board, etc., Brandon Lake was chosen with a chlorination system to look after the pressure zones of the city that we have. When is that going to happen? It's in all the reports.
Yes, I don't believe it's in the plan right now either.
But it's in the engineer's reports. We've paid for that indirectly. Well, I believe at Long Lake as well. But the system was to have chlorination and everything for a proper protected system out of Brandon Lake. And those are in the engineer's reports.
Any comments at all?
I'm sorry, I didn't actually hear the question. I don't know if, did you, Bill?
I can address it.
Did you, Mr. Sims, do you want to
address that, Your Worship?
Sure.
We have a number of emergency water intakes around in various bodies of water around the city, Westwood Lake, Long Lake, and Nanaimo River. And the intent would be that we'd pull fire trucks up and draw out of these bodies of water, pump into the local system. We also have, sitting in readiness, a emergency chlorination and treatment trailer that we're able to deploy in a situation to draw unpotable water from a water body and provide that to, say, tanker trucks or something. But it's a very low capacity. So that's the current situation.
Well, the main question is, if you go to the engineering reports of the designer of the Greater Nanaimo Water Board system, Brandon Lake was the system with chlorination plant to supply the city of Nanaimo. What's wrong with that? Why are we not operating on those engineers' reports? So anyways, my next question is, the use of urea spread in the watershed to grow trees, etc., is that having any effect on what we're looking at today for the treatment of our water and filtration and everything? Because it put a lot of nutrients into Jump Lake, etc., and I don't even know if it continues today or not, but it was done. And I'm wondering if that's having any influence on the quality of water today.
Mr. Sims, any comment?
Your Worship, there's the forestry practices have changed to the point where there's very, very little fertilizer used in the watershed. That was a 10-year-old practice, and that has not had any impact on the requirement to build the treatment plant.
Thank you.
And my last question, please, is in funding of the treatment plant. Out of the 62,000 people, I don't know the number that own vacant land that pay no user fee. Could a alternate process of paying this that everybody pays for it, i.e. a frontage tax or something else, besides user fees? After all, if you're trying to encourage us to grow a garden, and then you turn around putting up the price of the water, are you trying to encourage us to do something to use more water? Is that the scheme?
Council's policy at this time is that the user rates would reflect the full cost of providing water, and in our view, and I think the view of most municipalities, that represents a best practice in that water customers are charged the full cost so that they recognize the cost and conserve water more than they otherwise would if the part of the costs were hidden in taxation.
So my empty lot next door and all the other vacant lands in Nanaimo have a free ride.
But they don't actually use any water, Your Worship.
I know, but the system is for the whole of Nanaimo.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Good observations. Okay. Is that it? We just about made it.
Gord Fuller, 604 Nicholas Street. Yeah, just after listening to this tonight, I really have to shake my head with this whole alternate approval process. Effectively, what you're saying is that if enough people don't tick off a little box that says no to borrowing, the ones that don't even tick off any box are deemed to agree with the borrowing. So this is a foregone conclusion. It doesn't matter how much you educate the people about the four options Mr. Pache gave, the other options offered by Mr. Bestwick, and so on, as well as the option of holding off on the new annex, which could have paid for a considerable amount of this. So what was the point of this whole thing? And the question here will be, will it become common practice for councillors to request reconsidering motions that they are absent from and disagree with? Because I can see this happening on and on and on. I'm extremely disappointed.
Well, they have the right to do that if they wish. But you know, the one point is that's so unusual about this thing is that we've been mandated by VIA to do this. And so even with a negative vote, they still can't suspend our water license if we don't comply with it.
But there are other options than borrowing. And if the public were given a choice on which of those options, as opposed to